Hi, and welcome to this episode of the Discourse Collective. This time in politics. So when I started planning this video, I began with the starting point of why am I a liberal? Now, it turned out, in the great scheme of things, I'm not a liberal. The more I thought about it, the more I decided that actually what I am is a scientific meritocratist. Now, if you look that up in Wikipedia, you won't find anything. And if you ask Google what it is, it'll tell you you've made a mistake. And there's a simple reason for that. I made it up. I made it up because basically it defines what I believe. It's a phrase that for me encompasses my personal political beliefs. So before I get into why I'm a scientific meritocratist, and what that is, let's talk about the traditional political spectrum. So, a little history first. In 1789, the French National Assembly decided to make all those people in favour of supporting the king and his religion stand on the right side of the president. Those that supported La Révolution were to stand on the left. Who won? Well, that's not important right now. What is important is that forevermore we were left with a one-dimensional measurement of your political viewpoint. I think that's unhealthy, and I'm going to tell you why. Let's look at some of the major social changes that happened in the last 100 years in the UK alone. Social security system, free schooling until 18, national health service, public housing, union and labour laws. All of these were made to the backdrop of tax rises and tax cuts, changes in the law, social reform, and changes in how we work, live, socialise and worship. Now this was all made manifest by the political system of the UK. Those changes had real and substantive effects on people's lives. Some changes were led by Conservatives, some were led by Labour and Liberal parties. A precious few were made by cross-party collaboration. Why? Because, in its nature, politics is divisive. The stock and trade of a political party is to appeal to the people who will vote for it. They do that by creating policy that works towards some ideal. Examples of that are who pays tax and how much? Who gets help from the government and who doesn't? Should we aim for equality? And is that equality of opportunity or equality of outcome? What is legal and what isn't? And what does a family look like? Who cares for those who have nowhere else to turn? And what can a business do or not do? It's very unlikely that when you look at all of those above issues, you're completely on the Conservative or completely on the Liberal side of each one. It's more likely that you've got opinions on each that vary across the whole political spectrum. Not only that, but you have a depth of feeling about how each one should be managed. In other words, your political beliefs are two or maybe even three-dimensional. A single line with Conservative at one end and Liberal at the other just doesn't seem so nuanced. So back to my made-up political belief. I believe that the scientific method is literally the answer to everything. Or at least looking to science will lift us up quicker than any other mechanism. Picture a society that simply seeks to do the most good for the most number of people. Using science as a bedrock, it would research fiscal, social, environmental, healthcare policy by asking questions such as, are health outcomes of drug legalisation better or worse than those of prohibition? What's the most effective way to collect the required amount of money to run the country? How can we ensure that the right entities pay the right share in this data-led taxation system? Does society perform better when people can be open about their sexuality and about their gender? What makes for the best childhood in a family unit? Now, you'll have spotted several problems already. Firstly, these questions aren't very scientific. Best and worst are pretty subjective. However, these questions do open up opinions and options for scientific inquiry. For example, are tax collection rates higher for an income of 11% versus 13%? What number of adults who report being happy and well adjusted when they are 20 and they had 2 men or 2 women as their parents? What percentage of drug addicts who rehabilitate in a legalised supportive care environment have better outcomes than those in a prohibitive one? Now, these questions can be answered with data, and if correctly interpreted, policy that can be created from those parts of the data enrich the human experience within a society. This type of research is being done, but governments on both sides won't implement the policy based on that because it doesn't play well with their base. Well, I'm sorry, but screw that. What are we saying here? We're saying that we've got the opportunity to make things better for people, but we won't because we're scared we'll lose votes. That's not okay. It's going to delay the pace of positive change, and it's going to have a negative impact on people's lives. But let's move on. Who should be in charge of this new political system? Well, that's the meritocracy bit. The answer is scientifically minded leaders who are incorruptible. Now, the incorruptible bit is important, and I get it, difficult to achieve, perhaps impossible. Nearly all problems around using science in governance or social change come down to the corruptibility of the people or the research. The scientific model falls down when money is paid for results or research topics and directions are decided by lobby groups. When promising scientists and experiments are sidelined because of a political agenda, we all suffer. I'm not saying we allow a hyper-powerful scientific elite to rule unchecked, but let democracy mean democracy. It's quite feasible now to allow national referendums to be called for and voted for by the people on a case-by-case basis. If over 10,000 people all sign up a petition, for example, saying we think the economy would do better with a lower net immigration, then let that research be carried out and presented as a national referendum on net immigration. The Swiss make use of referendums often, and modern tech means it's really easy to do. What needs to be eradicated is the interference in the scientific method. Science has already got checks and balances, peer review. As long as that process is done with rigour, honesty, moral intent, and a lack of external influence, like lobbying, it can create policy safely. This is why I'm not on the mainstream political spectrum. When elections come around, I tend to vote towards the liberal end of the spectrum, but only because that's my only real choice. Do you think my vision of a scientific meritocracy is reasonable? Do you think it's even possible? Would you support a move towards it? I'd love to know. Please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. If you've enjoyed this video, please do like and subscribe below. There'll be a button around here. It does help. It really does help. So I've really enjoyed making this episode of the Discourse Collective, and I'll see you next time.